A glimpse of fate. The city was alive with movement, a constant rhythm of people chasing their ambitions. Neon signs flickered against the dusk sky, and honking horns filled the air with an unrelenting urgency. Among the suited professionals and fast-walking commuters, a lone girl sat on the cold concrete steps of an aging corner cafe. Her dress, once vibrant, had faded with time, its fabric thinning at the seams. Her shoes, too large for her small feet, were scuffed beyond recognition, the laces frayed. Her hands, tiny and trembling, clutched at her stomach as hunger gnawed at her insides. She watched the people pass, their eyes either too preoccupied or deliberately avoiding hers. They walked quickly, purposefully, like she was nothing more than another fixture of the streets, a ghost in a world too fast to notice her. Jason Wilder adjusted his cufflinks, his mind still buzzing from the negotiations that had dominated his afternoon. He had built his empire from the ground up, a series of strategic investments and hard decisions catapulting him into the ranks of the wealthy elite. Today had been another victory. He had closed a multi-million-dollar deal, securing land that would soon be transformed into luxury apartments. Yet, as his driver navigated the crowded streets of downtown, something unsettled him. A strange weight in his chest, an unexplained pull. His father used to tell him that real wealth wasn't measured in numbers but in moments. Jason hadn't fully understood that until he saw her. The car slowed at a red light, and through the tinted glass, Jason spotted a small figure approaching a businessman outside the cafe. She was young, too young to be alone. No older than 6 or 7, her dark curls tangled, her posture hesitant. She lifted a hand to her mouth, the universal sign for hunger, but before she could speak, the man sneered. "Get away from me," the businessman spat, stepping back as if the child carried disease. "Go bother someone else." Then he shoved her. Jason's breath caught as the girl stumbled, her small hands barely catching her fall before her knees hit the pavement. The burn of shame and rejection was written across her face as she clutched her scraped palms. The light turned green, and Jason felt his driver begin to accelerate. "Stop the car," Jason commanded, his voice sharp, urgent. "Sir," James, his driver, glanced in the rearview mirror, confused. "I said stop." Jason was already reaching for the door handle. The car pulled to the curb, and Jason stepped onto the sidewalk, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. People passed by without so much as a glance at the girl still on the ground. She didn't cry. That's what struck Jason the most. She had no tears left to shed. She simply lowered her head, as if bracing for more cruelty. He knelt beside her, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. "Hey," his voice was softer than he'd expected. "Are you okay?" She stiffened, her wide brown eyes darting to his before dropping to her hands. She quickly wiped them against her dress, as if ashamed of the dirt that clung to them. "I'm fine." The words were small, barely above a whisper. Jason exhaled slowly, glancing at the bruises forming on her knees. "That man had no right to do that to you." She said nothing, just curled in on herself, like a tiny bird in the rain. "What's your name?" Jason asked gently. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. Then, finally, "Ava." A name. A real, human name. Not some nameless street kid people ignored. Ava. Jason reached into his pocket, careful not to move too quickly. He pulled out his wallet, flipping through cash before taking out a $50 bill. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "Get yourself something to eat." Ava looked at the money but didn't take it. Jason frowned. "You don't want it." "I do," she admitted, her voice still small. "But people don't give things for free. There's always a catch." Jason felt something deep inside him twist, something unfamiliar, raw. A child shouldn't think like that. "There's no catch," he assured her. "You need food. This is for food." Still, she didn't reach for it. Instead, she bit her lower lip, eyes flickering to the cafe behind them. If I go inside, they'll make me leave. Jason glanced up at the cafe's entrance. Sure enough, the manager stood near the door, watching them with wary eyes. Jason felt his jaw tighten. "Come with me," he said, tucking the money back into his wallet. "We'll get something together." Ava hesitated, her small fingers twitching against the hem of her dress. Jason recognized the fear in her eyes, the kind that came from too many bad encounters with adults. "I promise," he said, holding up his hands in surrender. "Just food, nothing else." After a long moment, she nodded. Jason led her inside, where the warm scent of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around them. Heads turned as he entered, his presence commanding attention. The manager, an older woman with thin lips, narrowed her eyes at Ava. "She can't be in here," she said immediately. Jason's smile was tight. "She's with me." "She." "I don't repeat myself," Jason interrupted, his voice calm but firm. The woman pursed her lips but said nothing more. Jason led Ava to a booth by the window and waved over a waitress. "Get her whatever she wants," he instructed, placing a black credit card on the table. The waitress blinked at the card, then at Ava, then back at Jason. "Oh, of course, sir." Ava's eyes were wide as she looked at the menu, her fingers tracing the pictures of food like she was trying to memorize them. Jason watched her as she finally whispered, "Can I get pancakes?" "Pancakes," Jason confirmed. "Anything else?" Ava hesitated. Can I have orange juice too?" Jason smiled. "You can have whatever you want." For the first time since he'd seen her, Ava's lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile. When the food arrived, she stared at the plate, as if afraid it might disappear. Jason watched as she took her first cautious bite, her eyes widening at the taste. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if realizing it wasn't a dream. Jason didn't say anything. He simply sat across from her, letting her eat in peace. When her plate was empty, she sat back, a deep sigh escaping her lips. Her expression softened, and for the first time, she met Jason's gaze without fear. "Thank you," she said, her voice no longer trembling. Jason nodded. "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Where are your parents?" The light in her eyes dimmed. "My mom's gone," she said after a pause. "She got sick. My dad, he left a while ago." Jason felt his stomach drop. "Left?" Ava nodded, said he'd be back. She looked down at her hands. "But he never came." Jason leaned back, exhaling. He had expected tragedy. He had seen it before. But hearing it from this child, seeing the weight she carried, made it feel different. He had come into this cafe simply to help a hungry kid for a night. But as he looked at Ava, really looked at her, he knew this wasn't just a one-time encounter. Something inside him whispered, "You can't leave her here." And for the first time in his carefully structured life, Jason listened to the voice. A door left open. The night air was crisp as Jason Wilder and Ava stepped out of the cafe. The city hummed around them, cars rushing by, neon signs flickering like restless fireflies, and the distant sound of laughter and chatter filling the streets. But despite the lively scene, Jason's mind was locked on the young girl walking beside him. Her steps slow and uncertain, like she was afraid to believe this kindness was real. She had eaten every bite of her meal like it might be her last. She had clutched the fork too tightly, her fingers trembling, as if the food might vanish if she didn't eat fast enough. And now, full for the first time in what was likely days, she seemed almost hesitant to follow him further. Jason glanced at his watch. 9:12 p.m. He didn't want to leave her alone in the cold night, but he also knew she wouldn't accept help easily. "Where do you sleep?" he asked gently. Ava hesitated, adjusting the oversized sleeves of her tattered sweater. "Sometimes at the bus station," she admitted, "or in that alley near the bookstore." Jason's jaw tightened. A child sleeping in an alley. He had built skyscrapers, brokered billion-dollar deals, And yet here was a little girl with no home, no safety. "That's not safe," he said. Eva shrugged. "I'm used to it." Used to it. Those words made his stomach turn. Jason had never known real hunger. His childhood had been far from perfect. His parents were strict, wealth-driven, and emotionally distant, but he had never lacked food, warmth, or a bed. The idea that a 7-year-old girl could be used to sleeping in an alley made something in his chest burn. He stopped walking and crouched down so he was at her eye level. "I have a place not far from here," he said carefully. "You could stay the night. A warm bed. No alleys. No cold sidewalks." Ava's eyes darkened with suspicion. "Why?" "No reason except that it's the right thing to do," Jason answered honestly. She hesitated, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "People don't do things without wanting something in return." Jason's expression softened. "You're right. Most don't. But I don't want anything from you, Ava. Just a chance to help." Her lips pressed into a thin line. He could see the conflict raging in her, wanting to believe him, but years of disappointment and survival instincts telling her not to trust. "You can leave any time," Jason assured her. "If you don't like it, if you feel uncomfortable, you walk right out the door." Ava studied his face, searching for lies, but found none. "Okay," she whispered. Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "All right, let's go." The first night, Jason's penthouse was nothing like Ava had ever seen before. The elevator ride alone had been enough to make her uneasy, the smooth hum of the machine carrying them high above the city. And when the doors slid open, revealing a grand open-concept space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, she stopped short. The living room stretched wide, filled with sleek modern furniture, a glass fireplace flickering against a marble wall. The kitchen gleamed, pristine and untouched, like something from a magazine. But what caught Ava's attention most wasn't the size or the wealth. It was the warmth. Unlike other places she'd wandered into before, Jason's home felt lived in. A half-empty coffee cup rested on a side table. A book with a folded page lay open on the couch. The faint scent of something real, not artificial air fresheners, filled the air. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly feeling out of place. Jason noticed her stiffness. "Come in," he said gently, setting his keys down. "It's just a house, not a museum." Ava took a cautious step inside, her arms wrapped around herself. "It's really clean." Jason smirked. "That's because I'm never here long enough to make a mess." Ava's stomach twisted with nerves. She had slept in abandoned buildings, empty buses, and once inside a laundromat dryer when it was below freezing. But this was something entirely different. Jason walked over to a hallway and motioned for her to follow. "Come on, let's find you a room for tonight." She trailed behind him cautiously as he opened a door, revealing a cozy guest room. A large bed, freshly made with soft gray blankets, sat in the center, flanked by a wooden nightstand and a bookshelf half filled with books. A small lamp cast a warm, golden glow over the room. Jason watched as Ava stepped inside, her small hands brushing against the fabric of the bedspread. "This is for me. Just for tonight," Jason reminded her. "No pressure. If you want to leave in the morning, you can." Ava's throat felt tight. She had never been in a bed this big before. Never had pillows that weren't stuffed with newspaper. Never had a room where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. Jason cleared his throat. "Bathroom's down the hall if you need it. There's a toothbrush, some fresh towels." He hesitated. "And some of my sister's old clothes. They might be big, but better than nothing." Ava nodded, still standing stiffly in the middle of the room. Jason gave her one last glance before stepping out. "Good night, Ava." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Then, softly, "Good night. A night of peace." Ava didn't sleep right away. She lay in the bed, staring up at the ceiling, her fingers gripping the blankets. It was too soft, Too warm, too safe. She was used to the hardness of concrete, the distant hum of the city keeping her awake. But here, there was only silence, a stillness that felt foreign. A part of her expected the dream to end, that she'd wake up back in the alley, the weight of hunger pressing down on her. That Jason would suddenly change, demand something from her like others had before. But as minutes passed, and nothing happened, she let herself breathe. And, for the first time in years, Ava allowed herself to fall asleep without fear. Jason's late-night thoughts. Jason sat in his office, his hands pressed together, staring out the window. He had planned to work tonight, contracts to review, calls to return, but his mind refused to focus. Instead, it drifted back to the girl sleeping in the guest room. He had never thought much about children. His life had been built on strategy, discipline, and numbers. Kids didn't fit into that equation. And yet, Ava. There was something about her, something that made him feel like walking away wasn't an option. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. What am I doing? He had picked up a stray girl, fed her, and brought her to his home. Tomorrow, she'd likely be gone, back to the streets. That was reality. But deep down, Jason knew. If she walked away in the morning, it wouldn't be the last time he saw her. He wasn't ready to let her go. Not yet. And maybe, not ever. The chains of the past. A morning of decisions. Jason Wilder had spent most of his life waking up with one goal in mind: winning. Whether it was closing a deal, expanding his empire, or proving his worth in the ruthless corporate world, every morning began with an agenda. But today was different. This morning, as sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, his first thought wasn't about business. It was about Ava. He sat up, rubbing his face, his mind already racing. Would she still be here? Slipping out of bed, he moved quietly down the hall toward the guest room. His heart pounded with an unfamiliar unease. What if she had left in the middle of the night? What if he had been too late to help? But when he cracked open the door, the sight before him made him pause. Ava was still there, curled beneath the soft gray blankets, her breathing steady, her tiny frame barely making a dent in the large bed. Jason exhaled, relief washing over him. She stayed. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her sleep. It was strange, seeing someone so small, so vulnerable, in his home. She looked so different from the tough, guarded girl he'd met on the streets. In sleep, she looked like any other child, like she belonged somewhere safe. Jason turned and made his way to the kitchen. By the time Ava woke up, the smell of coffee and something warm filled the air. She sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, momentarily confused about where she was. Then she remembered. Jason. The guest room. The bed that felt too soft. Her stomach growled. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she hesitated before standing. Was it really okay for her to stay? The streets had taught her a painful truth. Nothing came without a cost. Cautiously, she made her way out of the room, her bare feet making no sound against the polished hardwood floor. When she reached the kitchen, she stopped. Jason was there, standing at the stove, dressed in a simple white t-shirt and black sweatpants, flipping pancakes. Pancakes. She didn't know the last time she'd had pancakes. Jason glanced over his shoulder and grinned. Good morning. Ava hesitated. Morning. Sleep okay? She nodded. He gestured to the kitchen island where a plate was already waiting for her. Take a seat. I hope you like pancakes. Ava hesitated again before sitting down. A steaming plate of golden brown pancakes sat before her, a bottle of syrup next to it. For a moment, she just stared at the food. Jason noticed. You all right? Ava swallowed. I just. She glanced up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. Jason frowned. What do you mean? She bit her lip. Nobody's ever made me breakfast before. Jason felt something tighten in his chest. This child, this 7-year-old girl, had spent her life alone. He exhaled, trying to keep his voice light. Well, I guess there's a first time for everything. Ava picked up her fork and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly, and she quickly took another, then another. Jason chuckled as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "Slow down," he teased. "I promise, there's more." Ava glanced up at him, her expression uncertain. "You're not mad." "Mad?" Jason blinked. "Why would I be mad?" She shrugged, pushing a piece of pancake around her plate. "Grown-ups get mad when kids eat too much." Jason set his coffee cup down. "Ava," he said gently, "you can eat as much as you want. I'll never be mad about that." For a long moment, she just stared at him, as if waiting for the catch. But when she found none, her shoulders relaxed, and she quietly went back to eating. An unexpected offer. After breakfast, Jason leaned against the counter, watching Ava as she wiped her syrup-covered fingers on a napkin. "You have anywhere to be today?" he asked. Ava shook her head. Jason hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If you want, you can stay a little longer." Ava tensed. Jason kept his tone casual. No pressure, just an option. She frowned, playing with the edge of her napkin. "Why?" Jason sighed. "Because you're a kid, Ava. And kids shouldn't have to sleep in alleys." Ava stared at him, eyes wary. He met her gaze, unwavering. "I don't expect anything from you. You don't owe me anything. I want to help." Ava looked down at her lap, her fingers twisting together. Then, in a small voice, "Just for a little while." Jason smiled. Just for a little while. A past that won't let go. Ava had only been at Jason's penthouse for 2 days when they came looking for her. Jason had been in his office, making a call, when the building's security desk rang. "Sir, there's a man downstairs asking for a girl named Ava." Jason's grip on his phone tightened. "Who is he?" "Says he's her uncle." Jason's jaw clenched. "I'll be right down." As he stepped into the elevator, his heart pounded. Ava hadn't mentioned an uncle. She had said her father left her. Had he come back? When Jason reached the lobby, he spotted the man immediately. Tall, gaunt, a faded leather jacket stained at the sleeves, greasy hair, eyes that held nothing but hunger. Jason recognized men like him, opportunists. The man's gaze landed on him, sharp and assessing. "You Jason Wilder." Jason crossed his arms. "Who's asking?" The man smirked. "I'm Ava's family." Jason didn't move. "She never mentioned you." The smirk disappeared. "She's a kid, probably forgot." Jason didn't believe that for a second. "What do you want?" Jason asked, his voice cold. The man licked his lips. "Look, buddy, I'm not a bad guy. I just heard my niece was shacked up in some rich guy's house, and I figured," his voice lowered, "maybe we could work something out." Jason's stomach churned. There it was. "She's not a bargaining chip," Jason said flatly. The man chuckled. "Simon, man, I raised that kid. She belongs with me." Jason's temper flared. "You raised her. Where were you when she was starving on the streets?" The man's smirk faltered. Jason stepped forward, voice like steel. "You think you can come here and demand money, threaten her safety?" His expression darkened. "You're a fool if you think I'd ever let that happen." The man took a step back. "Look, You're leaving." The man hesitated. Jason's voice dropped. "Now." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then, with a muttered curse, the man turned and walked away. Jason exhaled slowly, his hands clenched into fists. Ava had no one, and he had just realized something. He wasn't letting her go. Not now. Not ever. The ties that bind. The weight of a name. Jason Wilder wasn't a man who let emotions dictate his actions. His world was built on logic, strategy, and careful calculation. Every deal, every move, measured and precise. But when he rode the elevator back up to his penthouse after confronting the man who claimed to be Ava's uncle, his hands clenched at his sides. His thoughts weren't about business. They were about her. When he stepped into the apartment, Ava was sitting on the couch, hugging one of the throw pillows to her chest. She looked up the second he walked in. Jason hesitated, the tension from downstairs still in his bones. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to keep his voice even. "Ava," he said, "we need to talk." She stiffened. Jason moved toward the couch, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so he was at her eye level. He didn't want to intimidate her. He wanted her to know she was safe. "There was a man downstairs," he said carefully. "He claimed to be your uncle." Ava's grip on the pillow tightened. Jason waited, giving her space to process. Finally, she exhaled. "I don't have an uncle." Jason's jaw clenched. "That's what I thought." Ava looked down, her fingers twisting in the fabric of the pillow. "Was he tall? Greasy hair?" Jason nodded. Ava swallowed hard. "That's Mick." Jason frowned. "Who is he?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft he barely heard it, "My dad's old friend." Jason's stomach turned. "He used to come around sometimes," she continued, her voice distant, like she was talking about someone else's life. "After my mom got sick, Dad started spending more time with him. Then, one day, Dad just left. But Mick stayed. He told me he'd take care of me." Jason's hands curled into fists. "Did he hurt you?" Ava didn't answer right away. She just kept staring at the pillow, her small fingers gripping it like it was the only thing keeping her together. Jason's voice softened. "Ava?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not like that," she whispered. "He never hit me or anything. But he made me do things." Jason's breath caught. "Stealing," she clarified quickly. "Running errands for him. Picking up things from people I didn't know. And if I didn't, he'd take my food away. Or lock me out for the night." Jason inhaled sharply, his entire body going rigid. She was a child. A child being used like a pawn. Ava finally looked up at him, something pleading in her dark eyes. "Please don't make me go back." Jason reached out before he even realized what he was doing, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. Ava's lower lip trembled. "But he found me. He won't stop." Jason cut her off. "Let me handle Mick." Ava hesitated. "You want?" Jason's expression darkened. "He won't be bothering you again." Severing the chains. Jason wasn't naive. He knew men like Mick. He knew their kind all too well. Leeching off others, preying on the vulnerable, taking without giving. And he also knew men like Mick didn't just walk away. The next day, Jason made some calls. He didn't go to the police. Not yet. The system was flawed, and men like Mick knew how to slip through the cracks. Instead, he went to someone he trusted, someone who cleaned up problems in ways the law couldn't. Dante Rivera. Dante had been a friend since their college days, but unlike Jason, he hadn't gone into corporate business. He had built an empire of a different kind: private security, risk management, and, when necessary, removing threats that wouldn't go away on their own. Jason met him at a high-end bar downtown, a place where deals were made in hushed tones over expensive whiskey. Dante smirked when he saw Jason, swirling a glass of dark liquor in his hand. "You? Calling me? Must be serious." Jason didn't waste time. "There's a man. Name's Mick. He's been using a kid, Ava. I want him gone." Dante raised an eyebrow. Gone. Jason hesitated. He wasn't a violent man, but the thought of Ava being dragged back to the streets made his blood boil. "No," Jason said finally, "but I want him out of the city. I want him to know if he ever comes near her again, he won't get a second warning." Dante's smirk widened. "Now that, my friend, is something I can do. A home or a temporary stay." When Jason returned to the penthouse that night, He found Ava sitting on the floor of the living room, flipping through one of the books from the shelf. He leaned against the doorway. "You like to read?" Ava shrugged. "Used to." Jason walked over and sat on the couch. "You can stay as long as you want, you know." Ava hesitated, her fingers brushing against the pages of the book. "You mean until you get tired of me?" Jason's heart twisted. "I mean as long as you want." Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the penthouse, at the warm lighting, the comfortable furniture, the world she had never belonged to. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to live like this." Jason frowned. "Like what?" "Like, I don't have to survive every second of the day." Jason exhaled, his voice gentle but firm. "Then let's figure it out together." Ava looked at him for a long time, searching for the lie. But for the first time in her life, she didn't find one. The beginning of something more. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Ava stayed. At first, it was just one more day, then another, then another. She still flinched at loud noises, still hesitated before taking food, still woke up some nights with a fear she couldn't name. But little by little, she changed. Jason watched as she found small joys in everyday things, how she smiled when he let her pick out her own clothes for the first time, how she lit up when she discovered the books in the study, how she beamed the first time he let her choose dinner, and she picked mac and cheese. He hired a tutor, got her enrolled in school, watched her slowly become a kid again. And then one day, something happened that neither of them expected. Jason had been working late in his office when Ava poked her head in. He glanced up. "Can't sleep." She hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, "You're not sending me away, right?" Jason set his pen down, looking her straight in the eye. "Never." Ava chewed her lip. Then, after a moment, she took a deep breath and whispered, "Can I call you Dad?" Jason's heart stopped. The word hit him harder than any business deal, any contract, any victory. Slowly, he nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "Yeah, you can." Ava exhaled in relief. Then, for the first time, she walked over and hugged him. Jason closed his eyes, returning the embrace. And just like that, he wasn't just Jason Welder, CEO, anymore. He was a father, and nothing in the world mattered more. The ties that bind. The first real home. The days passed, turning into weeks. Ava was still in Jason's penthouse, but she wasn't just a guest anymore. At first, she had remained cautious, treating each day as if it might be her last in the warmth of this home. Every morning, Jason noticed her hesitation, the way she would wake up and pause before getting out of bed, as if expecting someone to tell her it was all a mistake, that she didn't belong here. But he never did. Instead, he made space for her in small ways. He cleared out a section of the kitchen pantry just for her snacks, giving her the freedom to eat whenever she wanted instead of waiting for permission. He left a nightlight in her room when he noticed she wouldn't sleep unless there was a glow of light somewhere nearby. And when he came home late one night and found her curled up on the couch, flipping through channels but not really watching anything, he simply sat beside her and said, "You don't have to stay up waiting for me, you know." Ava shrugged. "Just used to it, I guess." Jason's chest tightened. How many nights had she been alone before this? How many times had she waited for someone who never came back? He wasn't about to be one of those people. So he said something simple, something that made Ava's eyes widen slightly, like she wasn't sure she heard him right. "You don't have to wait anymore." She didn't say anything, but the next night, when he got home late, he found her already asleep in her bed. That was how he knew. Slowly, she was beginning to believe it. The call that changed everything. One morning, Jason was reviewing contracts in his home office when his phone buzzed. "Dante." Jason leaned back in his chair, exhaling before answering. "Tell me you have good news." Dante chuckled. "Oh, I do. Mick's gone." Jason straightened. "Gone." He got the message, Dant said. Not the type to go looking for trouble when he knows he's outmatched. Left town 2 days ago. Jason exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Mick was no longer a threat. Ava was safe. Good, Jason said, rubbing his jaw. If he ever comes back. He won't, Dant assured him. Not unless he's an idiot. Jason smirked. You and I both know there's no shortage of those. Dant chuckled. True, but this one. He's too much of a coward to poke the bear twice. Consider it handled. Jason ended the call and leaned forward, pressing his hands together. Ava was free. No more running. No more fear of someone coming to take her away. And now he had to make sure she knew it. More than just temporary. Later that day, Jason sat across from Ava at the dining table, watching her push macaroni around her plate with her fork. He had noticed something lately. She wasn't asking when she had to leave anymore. But she still hadn't asked to stay either. Jason cleared his throat. Ava. She glanced up, mid-bite. Yeah. He exhaled. Mick's gone. Her fork froze. Jason saw the slight tremble in her fingers before she quickly hid it, setting the utensil down. Gone. Jason nodded. Left town. He won't come back. Ava swallowed hard. She didn't say anything for a long time, just staring down at her plate. Then, finally. So, what happens now? Jason leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. That's up to you. Ava frowned. What do you mean? Jason studied her carefully. You don't have to go back to the streets, Ava. You don't have to survive alone anymore. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. I know, but... Jason let the silence settle between them. Then said, Do you want to stay? Ava's breath caught. She looked at him like he had just spoken a language he didn't understand. She hesitated. I didn't think that was an option. Jason's brows furrowed. Why not? Ava looked away. Because people don't just keep me. Jason's chest tightened. He sat back, running a hand down his face. He knew she had been abandoned, had been treated like an afterthought, but hearing her say it out loud like she truly believed it made his blood boil. He leaned forward again, voice steady but firm. Well, I'm not people. Ava blinked. Jason exhaled. Listen to me, Ava. I don't do things halfway. If you want to stay, then this isn't just a couch to crash on. This is a home. Yours. And no one is going to take that away from you. Ava's eyes filled with something raw. Hope. Disbelief. Fear that it was too good to be true. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands curled into small fists against her lap. Really? She finally whispered. Jason nodded. Really? For a long time, Ava didn't move. Then, without warning, she launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Jason's waist, pressing her face into his chest. Jason's breath caught. She was shaking. And then he realized she was crying. Not loud, not in sobs, just silent, uncontrollable tears. He hesitated, then slowly placed a hand on her back, his touch unsure but steady. Ava had been holding everything in for too long, and Jason knew exactly what that felt like. So he didn't say anything. He just held on. And in that moment, everything changed. Because Ava wasn't just a kid he had helped. She was his, and she always would be. More than blood. The question that changed everything. Jason Wilder had spent years building walls around himself. His empire wasn't just made of steel and glass. It was made of control, of knowing how to calculate every move. But sitting at the dining table with Ava, a child who had never known what it was like to be wanted, he realized something. Some things weren't meant to be calculated. Some things were meant to be chosen. And in that moment, Jason chose her. But there was one problem. He couldn't just keep her without making it legal. She wasn't a stray puppy he had picked up. She was a little girl who deserved a real home, a real family. and a future where she never had to worry about being abandoned again. Which meant there was only one option. Jason leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Ava, I need to ask you something." Ava, who had finally calmed down after the wave of emotions, sniffed and wiped at her nose with her sleeve. "What?" Jason hesitated. "This wasn't something you just said. This was something that changed everything." Finally, he took a deep breath and said the words that had been forming in his heart for weeks. "What if I adopted you?" Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Eva froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set it down, her eyes wide with something Jason couldn't quite place. Shock. Disbelief. Fear. "What?" she whispered. Jason exhaled, steadying himself. "I'm saying, what if you became my daughter?" Officially. Ava's face was unreadable. Then, very slowly, she pushed her plate away. And for the first time, Jason was afraid. Had he gone too far? Had he pushed her into something she wasn't ready for? But then Ava spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean, forever?" Jason's throat felt tight. "Yes." Ava's lips pressed together. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "You don't have to do that, you know," she muttered. Jason frowned. "Do what?" Ava lifted her head, and for the first time, there was anger in her eyes. "Feel sorry for me." Jason's brows furrowed. "Ava, I'm fine," she cut in, crossing her arms. "I don't need." Her voice broke. Jason saw it then, the wall she was trying so hard to rebuild. She was scared. She had spent her whole life believing she was temporary, that no one would ever keep her, that if she let herself believe in something good, it would be ripped away. Jason's expression softened. He didn't try to convince her. He didn't say, "I won't leave you." Instead, he said something far more important. "I don't feel sorry for you." Ava blinked. Jason leaned forward. "I don't pity you, Ava. I don't think of you as some charity case. This isn't about that." She swallowed hard. "Then why?" Jason took a deep breath. "Because I want you here. Because you belong here." Ava's breath hitched. Jason gave her a small smile. "You don't have to decide right now. But just know, the door's open, always." Ava looked away, blinking rapidly, as if trying to keep herself together. Then, finally, she nodded. Just once. It wasn't much, but it was something. The legal battle. Jason wasted no time. He had built an empire by knowing how to win battles before they even started. And this was the most important battle of his life. The next day, he called his lawyer. The process wasn't easy. Ava had no formal records of her whereabouts, no official guardian listed. Her father had abandoned her, but legally, he still had rights. And that meant Jason had to find him. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of searching, of calling every contact he had, of digging through records. And when they found him, ***, Frank Calloway, Ava's father. ***, he was exactly where Jason had expected. In prison. For armed robbery. Jason stood outside the holding area, arms crossed, as the warden explained the situation. "He's been here for a year now," the man said, flipping through Frank's file. "Not eligible for parole for another 5. Jason's jaw tightened. This man had left his daughter on the streets. And now, Jason was about to give Ava the life she deserved. He was escorted into the meeting room, where Frank was already waiting on the other side of the glass. He was younger than Jason expected, probably no older than 35, but his face was hardened by bad decisions. His eyes flickered up. "You the one asking about my kid?" Jason didn't bother with small talk. "I want custody of her." Frank smirked, leaning back. "That right?" Jason's expression was unreadable. "You're not getting out anytime soon. You abandoned her. She has no legal guardian. Sign the papers." Frank tilted his head. And if I don't? Jason's gaze darkened. Then she goes into the system. She bounces between foster homes. You know how that ends. Frank was silent. Then, after a moment, he chuckled. You're rich, aren't you? Jason didn't answer. Frank smirked. What's in it for me? Jason's eyes flashed. There it was. He leaned forward, voice cold as ice. I'll make you a deal. You sign over custody, and I'll make sure she never hates you for what you did. Frank's smirk faltered. Jason continued, voice measured. I'll tell her you did the right thing. That you let her go because you loved her. He tilted his head. Or you can refuse. And I'll make sure she never forgets that you left her to starve. Frank swallowed. Jason didn't break eye contact. You don't deserve her, he said quietly. But she deserves a life. So be a man. Do one thing right. Silence. Then, Frank sighed. Where do I sign? A new beginning. The moment Jason got the call that the paperwork had been finalized, he went straight home. Ava was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book. She looked up when he entered, blinking. Hey. Jason sat down beside her. It's done. Ava frowned. What is? Jason smiled. You're mine. Ava's lips parted. What? Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a folder, placing it in her hands. Inside was a new birth certificate. Her name, Ava Calloway Wilder. Ava stared at it, her hands trembling. Jason's voice was quiet but steady. I told you. The door's open. Ava inhaled sharply, pressing the folder against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then, without a word, she threw her arms around Jason's neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Jason hugged her back, his grip firm, steady. And for the first time in her life, Ava had a home. Not just a place. Not just a roof. A family. And this time, no one was ever going to take it away from her. A family forged in love. Ava Calloway Wilder. The day Ava received her new birth certificate, something changed. Not in the grand, dramatic way that movies made it seem. There were no fireworks, no sudden wave of emotions that made everything perfect. Instead, it was quiet. It was the way she traced her fingers over her new last name. Wilder, as if she needed to memorize the way it looked on paper. It was the way she stared at Jason afterward, her lips parted, her eyes filled with something between disbelief and cautious hope. And it was the way she whispered, so it's real. Jason nodded, watching her carefully. It's real. Ava swallowed, her small fingers gripping the paper tightly. You're my dad now, she asked, like she was testing the words on her tongue. Jason's throat felt tight, but he managed a small smile. If you want me to be. Ava blinked at him. Then, very softly, so softly he almost missed it. I do. Jason exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized how much he had needed to hear that. Then, Ava did something unexpected. She walked over, hesitated for only a second, and leaned against him, resting her forehead against his chest. It wasn't quite a hug, but it was close. Jason, who had never been the hugging type, surprised himself by wrapping an arm around her, resting his chin lightly on the top of her head. And just like that, Ava belonged. Not just legally, not just on paper, but in his heart. Becoming a father. Adopting Ava had been the easy part. Becoming a father. That was an entirely different challenge. Jason had spent his life negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, outsmarting business tycoons, and thriving in a world where emotions were a weakness. But fatherhood didn't come with a contract. There were no rules, no step-by-step guides to raising a child who had spent most of her life surviving instead of living. And for the first time, Jason didn't have all the answers. The first time, he tried to help Ava with her math homework. She got frustrated and threw her pencil across the room. The first time she had a nightmare, she didn't cry out for help. She just curled into herself, shaking, too used to facing fear alone. The first time he left for work and came home late, he found her sitting on the couch, eyes distant, arms wrapped around her knees. When he asked what was wrong, she just whispered, "I thought maybe you weren't coming back." And that was when Jason realized this was going to take time. She had spent her whole life expecting people to walk away. Jason wasn't going to be one of them. So he adjusted. He learned. When Ava got frustrated with homework, Jason didn't push. He sat beside her, quiet and patient, until she was ready to try again. When she had nightmares, he started leaving the hallway light on, so she'd never wake up in the dark alone. And when he had to work late, he made sure to always call. "Hey, kid," he'd say. "I'll be home soon." And every time, Ava's response was the same. Okay. Not just okay as in she understood, but okay as in she believed him. That was progress. A mother's love. If Jason had been uncertain about fatherhood, Emily Wilder had been born for motherhood. She and Jason had known each other for years. Partners in business, best friends in life. She had always been the one to balance him. She had a way of making any place feel like home. And when Ava entered their lives, it was Emily who helped Jason understand what Ava needed most. "You can't just give her a house, Jason," Emily had told him one night. "She needs more than that. She needs warmth, routine, stability." So they created those things for her. Emily made breakfast every morning, something warm and predictable. She helped Ava decorate her new bedroom, letting her choose everything from the paint color to the posters on the walls. She took her shopping for clothes, something Ava had never done before. And slowly, bit by bit, Ava bloomed. One evening, Jason walked into the living room to find Ava lying on the couch, her head resting on Emily's lap. Emily was running her fingers through Ava's hair, humming softly, while Ava's eyes drifted closed. Jason stood in the doorway, watching. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hesitant. It was natural. Ava had found a mother. Emily had found a daughter. And Jason had found a family. First day of school. Getting Ava to agree to go to school had been a battle. "I don't need school," she had argued. "I've been fine without it." Jason had raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Then tell me, what's 9 times 7? Ava had opened her mouth, paused, and scowled. "Shut up." Jason had won that argument. But the morning of her first day, she wasn't so confident anymore. She sat in the car, staring at the building with nervous eyes, her fingers gripping her backpack straps tightly. Jason noticed. "Hey," he said. "What's wrong?" Ava swallowed hard. "What if I don't fit in?" Jason considered this. Then he smirked. "If anyone gives you trouble, just tell them your dad's rich and can buy their house." Ava rolled her eyes. "You're the worst." Jason chuckled. "You'll be fine." Ava bit her lip. "You'll pick me up, right?" Jason's smirk softened. "Every single day." She exhaled, then nodded. And when she walked toward the school, her small frame disappearing into the crowd of students, Jason felt something unexpected. Pride. She was his. The first, "I love you." It happened on an ordinary night. Jason had just tucked Ava in, pulling the blankets up to her chin like he did every night. He was about to leave when Ava's voice stopped him. "Jason." He turned. "Yeah." She hesitated, her small hands gripping the blanket. Then, very softly, "I love you." Jason's chest tightened. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't move. Then, finally, he walked over, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I love you too, kid." Ava smiled. And in that moment, Jason knew. He had spent years building an empire. But this girl, this family, was his greatest success. Epilogue. The man she became. 10 years later. The university graduation hall was packed. The air buzzed with excitement, families cheering, students tossing their caps into the air. Jason sat in the front row, watching his daughter walk across the stage. Ava Calloway Wilder, a valedictorian, a scholarship recipient, a fighter. She had come so far from the little girl who had sat alone in an alley, hungry and afraid. Now she was unstoppable. As she took her diploma, her eyes found Jason in a crowd. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Instead, she just smiled. And Jason, who had spent a lifetime believing love was something you earned, something measured in power and wealth, finally understood. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who you chose. And Ava had chosen him, just like he had chosen her. Forever.